Because Ari Fleischer is my guest for the next 45 minutes or so. But I love this refrain. Pick it up, Adam. Because when it says boom, 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 that's when I think about Ari's new book, Suppression, Deception, Snobbery, and Bias. Because it says boom, boom, boom. And Ari, you boom, boom, boom the legacy media in this book. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. They boom, boom, boom themselves.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. We'll come back with that again, and we'll get the boom, boom, boom payoff. Ari, you and I have been doing a lot of media together ever since you left the Bush White House. We show up, a memorable New Year's Eve show on Sean and Hannity for reasons I won't go into. But we have had, I just agree with everything. And what you've done is put into one book, in Suppression, Deception, Snobbery, and Bias, a compendium of all the fumbles, miscues, intentional mistakes, intellectual dishonesty, and I love snobbery. And how is it being received by our mutual friends in legacy media?
What a great question. I'm proud to report it reached number 6 on Publishers Weekly. It hit number 8 on the Wall Street Journal and 0 on the New York Times. They didn't cover it. They didn't rank it. I'm told it would have been number 5 on the New York Times by the number of sales. But even the news outlets, not the book lists, they won't cover it. They're suppressing it. They're proving my
There's
point.
your title, Ari. Just use the New York Times. Suppress the existence of the book. Deceive people as to its popularity. Why? Because you're snobbish towards center-right Republicans and you're biased against conservatism. Doesn't that just fit perfectly?
It does, Hugh, but it illustrates the deeper problem of the media. This is why they're in decline. They refuse to look at what they're doing wrong. Any other industry that's been losing so many customers like the mainstream media would say, what's wrong with us? What do we need to do differently? The media instead says, what's wrong with our critics and what's wrong with our customers? And they keep doing the same thing.
Well, I'm going to dive deep into some specifics here, but I want to start with a very specific question. Chris Licht is the new head of CNN. You and I have no ties to CNN. I get along fine with the old boss, Jeff Zucker. He once offered me a job. I turned him down. I once asked him for a job. He turned me down, so we're even. I know you get along with all those people as well, but it's a smoldering wreck of a network. How would you, Ari Fleischer, recommend to Chris Licht that he rebuild his network?
Well, CNN fired Jeff Zucker for a variety of reasons, but Jeff Zucker, the former boss, was the one who pushed them into opinion journalism. They were heading there themselves, many of the reporters, thanks to social media and some of the changes underway, just the way journalists become activists. But then under Trump, Jeff Zucker let it loose and let his anchors and reporters and daytime news reporters fly with their anti-Trump opinions, anti-Republican opinions. Zucker gets fired. They bring in Licht, and I'm fascinated by a potential CNN experiment. Licht has said he wants to return to objective, down-the-middle news. So, one, does he mean it? And two, if he does, who will he fire? He's been there 3 months, so you would think he would make his move already. But I can't wait to see if he does it. And if he does, Hugh, is there an economic market for neutral, down-the-middle, old-fashioned, objective journalism, if that's what CNN does?
Ari, I think there is a market. I, in fact, am going to invest in John Ellis's News Item Substack, News Items by John Ellis, because that's what he does. It's a morning newsletter that's real news, and I recommend people. I haven't invested yet, but I'm going to. I need news. CNN doesn't do news now, and I would start. I'm not going to talk about who he's going to fire. I would keep Dana Bash and Jamie Gangel. All right, those two people, and there might be others, but I would just say those two have their reputations. Maybe they go a little center-left sometime, but they're reporters. Who else would you keep if you're Chris Licht? Start with your lineup that you've got in your minor leagues. Who do you keep?
I think Alison Camerata, one of the anchors, has done her best to resist the push to the far left. She still is a little left. Most of them are. Most reporters are. I think John Berman will play ball. But, the ones it's Don Lemon. It's some of the people who are the most vehement. My book begins with a Don Lemon vignette in which he has 2 guests on his show. And they go from the usual mockery and disdain for Donald Trump to laughing out loud, live on the air, about Trump voters. And this is one of the reasons I call it snobbery. The disdain authorized from the top for half this country is what's killing journalism. And people who are pro-life, who hunt, who have guns, they know it.
Yeah. Before Don went hard left, he came out to the Blog World Expo in Las Vegas, and I walked around. He's a good guy, nice guy. But he's not particularly well informed on very basic matters of law and history. And it shows whenever he vamps. And so I finally just put the microphone down, and back when I was working with them but not for them, I said, no more, no mas. I'm not playing with Don Lemon anymore. He doesn't know what he's doing, and it's not professional. They've lost a lot of people to that, not being professional. And being professional means if you have an opinion, don't hide it. I mean, I love transparency. I want to start with thanking you for including the Jane Coaston interview. I was pleasantly surprised to find myself there. But the star of that interview was Jane, and the reason she's quoted in your book is she was honest.
Yep. But she was not honest about giving her opinion about public policy or who should or should not get elected. She was honest describing how far left her colleagues in the media are. And that, to me, was refreshing to hear somebody acknowledge that only maybe 3-5% of the reporters are pro-life, maybe 8% are pro-Israel. You know, it's that kind of snapshot into who goes into reporting in the first place, which is what leads to why the press is so bad and so wrong so often, because you have such a self-selection of what's essentially become college-educated Democrats. That's all they are.
And by the way, your experience at Columbia Journalism School, very similar to mine. When I was called up by Nick Lemon, he wanted to do a profile of me for the New Yorker, and I agreed, but I said, but I get to do a profile for the Weekly Standard back in the days when it was sane. And we agreed, mutual assured destruction. So he came out and spent, a few days with me and wrote this nice long piece in the New Yorker. I went to Columbia Journalism School. They were so left-wing, Ari, and you have the details. How often do you go up there?
I've done it twice, Hugh. I did it a long time ago, 1998, and I did it in 2020. Spoke to 24 students total in 2 classes of 12. After each time, I said, in the previous presidential elections, did you vote for the Republican or the Democrat for president? And the vote was 24-0 for the Democrat. And how can journalism function when it's so lopsided? And it's not just Columbia. It's virtually every journalism school across the country. And then they graduate into newsrooms that are just like them. One of the studies I put in the book, it's a Pew poll, and it showed that the only group of Americans who thinks that the press understands them are college-educated Democrats.
They are
a Democrat with a high school diploma. You don't think the press understands you. Independents, college, in high school, press doesn't understand you. Republicans, press doesn't understand you. Journalism has turned itself into a little narrow ideological cul-de-sac of college-educated Democrats who tell stories and report news for fellow college-educated Democrats. And they're letting the rest of America down.
It's an island from which everyone else has departed, except that demographic. Now, Ari, I want to explain to the audience. I've had the same experience. I used to teach an undergraduate course from my friend Bill Abdel, who was a bigwig for a while at the LA Times. And he would teach undergraduates in journalism class. And those were 200 kids. And I would first divide the class. I'd make them move. If you're pro-choice, go over to the left side of the room. If you're pro-life, go over to the right. There aren't that many. If you own a gun, go to the right side of the room. If you're for removing all AR-15s from the market, go to the left side. I would divide them out. And at the end, you've got the hardest left people on the left, and you got the most conservative people on the right. And I said, okay, will the newspapers be the same every day if the left side of this auditorium produces it or the right side? And everyone agrees right away. Oh, they'll be different. Well, that's actually what's happened. It's self-selection of the left for the left. Or am I wrong?
Exactly. No, you nailed it. And that's one of the big theses of my book. And, one of the ways I prove this, because when I say most reporters are college-educated Democrats, it's not my assumption. It's a fact. I hired an opposition research firm, Hugh, to pull the records, the public records, of the 49 reporters who sit in the 49 seats in the White House briefing room. And they found by a 12-1 ratio, those reporters are registered Democrat to Republican. The New York Times reporter is a registered Democrat. The Los Angeles Times reporter, registered Democrat. Bloomberg, registered Democrat. Both NPR reporters, of course, are Democrats. Think about it. The news was 12-1 Republican to Democrat. The information people get would be so different, so profoundly different. And I'll tell you, the biggest difference, Hugh, would be coverage of poverty issues, coverage of the invisible hand of capitalism, lifting people up out of poverty, from lower income to lower middle income, from lower middle to middle. The genius of innovation, entrepreneurship, capitalism, education, all of that would be covered regularly. We'd see so much less coverage of the Green New Deal and global warming. The culture would be different. But just give me a newsroom that's one-to-one, that's balanced.
Yeah,
that's
but
fair,
that,
that's
you know,
even.
you quoted Jane Coaston. If you'd gone back further in the archive, Tom Edsall came on this show a few years ago, like 15 years ago, said the same thing. 85 to 90% of reporters working in legacy media vote Democrat. If they vote. If they don't vote, that's just a show. And that's,
Right.
I think it's the same. It's gotten worse, perhaps. And when I come back from break, I'm going to ask you again, what would Ari Fleischer do at CNN? We got so much of that. We got to talk about the Steele dossier. We got to talk about former administration officials who take jobs. We got to talk about the rise of the Free Beacon and the Examiner in opposition to the Washington Post, for whom I work, and the New York Times. We got so much in Ari's book, but I want people to look at it. Suppression, Deception, Snobbery, and Bias. It's put out by Broadside. And Ari, why did you go with the long title?
Because I want to capture what was wrong. And it's a stumbly title. It's hard to memorize, but I have it memorized because I believe it so deeply that these are the things that are killing journalism. And I want journalism to do better. And the way to do better is stop suppressing the news, stop deceiving the voters, be in touch, stop being snobs, and your bias will end.
Yeah, the trouble with cliffs is if you keep going towards them, Thelma and Louise style, you eventually go over them. I think they've gone over the cliff. Now, I look for ratings whenever I can. I want to see who's winning the Sunday shows, who's declining over here. Why is it so hard to find TV ratings when they're so obviously available to TV executives?
Yeah, I do get the ratings. I look at them. Because the sad truth for mainstream media is conservative media is booming in terms of how people vote with their remotes and their eyeballs. And mainstream media is in decline in terms of viewership and profitability. So, again, I'm trying to save journalism by exposing what's wrong with it because I have tremendous respect for the fourth pillar. We need it in our democracy. But today's mainstream media ain't it. They're part of the problem that divides America. So I have a solution in the book, but the mainstream media has done this to itself. They're losing customers, losing money, losing business because they will not change.
When
and
I
Donald
come
Trump
back,
played a part too.
we're going to talk about Donald
made them
Trump.
lose their minds.
Yeah, he did. We're going to talk about TDS. We're mostly going to talk, though, about CNN and what Ari would do to save it, and about the Steele dossier and the Mueller investigation. Because if there is one overarching theme in Ari's book, it's the failure of the media during the Trump administration, personified by Christopher Steele. It's so detailed. It is all in this book: Suppression, Deception, Snobbery, and Bias. The single best book on the media I've read in 20 years. Go and get it during the break. Boom, boom, boom. That's what Ari Fleischer does in his brand new book, Suppression, Deception, Snobbery, and Bias. This book is available at Amazon.com right now. It is flying off the shelves by people who are interested in saving the media and understanding what has happened to it, legacy media. Ari, I'm very serious. When Jeff ran CNN, people tried to please Jeff. When Andy Lake ran NBC, people tried to please Andy Lake. People will try and please Chris Lick now. I don't know if anyone will tell him the truth, but he'll have the numbers. What would you program? How would you program CNN? And not generally, but specifically. I have my list of people I'd hire over there. Who would you hire over there?
I don't know who I would hire. I know who I would get rid of, or I would tell them you need to change. I'd start with John Harwood, their so-called White House correspondent, who is really in the tank for the Democrats. Jim Acosta, of course, who was rewarded with his own TV show for his bias. What I would do is go back to the 90s at CNN. What made them famous? Straight down the middle, objective, we're there, you're not. We'll tell you what happened, reporting. CNN has a massive staff. They still have lots of bureaus in lots of places around the world. And that's why I like journalism. I'm not everywhere. I'm not there. If someone is there and they're called a reporter, just tell me, the viewer, the reader, what happened. I'll tell you what it means. All the American people will tell you what it means. Don't tell me what it means. So my approach to journalism and to CNN specific is get back to what makes journalism valuable to all of us.
Well, you know, the trouble, Ari, is that monetization of that is very difficult because it's faster to read the news than it is to watch the news. So if you want to watch the news, you've got to want to watch Ari Fleischer, who's very good on TV. I would go out and I would hire Mary Catherine Ham, who's already a CNN person, give her a show. I'd go steal Guy Benson and give him a show. I'd get Sungmin Kim, give her a show. I'd get Jake Sherman. I'd get Pentagon reporters, by the way. I think Pentagon reporters like Carol Lee and Courtney Kuby are just extraordinary because they're smart and they know stuff. That's why Brett Baer's such a good anchor. He's a Pentagon reporter beforehand. And I don't mind if they're a little bit left or a little bit right. I just mind the people who are out and out, always left, and can't say a good thing ever about anyone on their other side.
Yeah, and, I'm just loath to get into who they should hire. I've never tried to tell anybody in the private sector who to hire, what to do in that sense. I look at this as a structural problem CNN has because they encourage their anchors and their reporters to constantly give anti-Trump opinions live on the air, and it undermined them. And it didn't even really help them with their liberal base. There was a story yesterday in the New York Times about CNN's ratings and viewing. Their revenues are below $1 billion for the first time in I think it was 20 years. They're in trouble.
Would you go back to a crossfire model? That was a successful show until Jon Stewart blew it up.
Yes, I would. It's a fascinating trend. One of the chapters in my book is the way it was, and I trace why journalism has run to its various niches. And I do like more balance on shows, left-right points of view from guests, not reporters and not anchors. But what happens is you've got to pick your guests with care. If you pick your guests because they're the most flamboyant shouters in society, well, then, yeah, you've got a real noisy show, and maybe it'll entertain. But if you pick your guests who are smart, knowledgeable, fair-minded, they don't challenge the motives of the other side, they respect people, boy, does that lift up our country. And I think that can be good viewership. And, economically, Hugh, the pendulum swings. People have run to their niches right now across the media, but that doesn't mean it stays that way forever. I think people get tired. I hear it all the time. People say, where can I go to get objective down-the-middle news? And I've got to tell you, the daytime shows on Fox are so much more fair, and the daytime anchors and reporters are so much more fair than CNN's.
Well, Brett is now America's anchor. I think Brett is America's anchor. I think he's the last trustworthy anchor in America. I got to play for you now. MSNBC, everyone in this audience, I work for them. I had the lowest rated show in the history of MSNBC because they put it on 7:30 in the morning on Saturday after an infomercial. They were really invested in the success of that, weren't they? So anyway, Ellie Meistel goes on MSNBC with Tiffany Cross. I don't know Meistel. I don't know Cross. They're both post-Hewitt years at NBC. But this was on This Week, Ari, cut number 1.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to thank the GOP for nominating a running back from Dallas to run in Georgia and a TV doctor from New Jersey to run in Pennsylvania. Thank you guys, right?
Yes.
But yes, it's going to be a close election in Georgia because Walker has the backing of the Republicans. Now you ask, why are Republicans backing this man who's so clearly unintelligent, who so clearly doesn't have independent thoughts? But that's actually the reason. Walker's going to do what he's told. And that's what Republicans like. That's what Republicans want from their Negroes, to do what they're told.
All right, Ari, first react to that comment.
Oh, I wish you could have seen my face. When he says doesn't have independent thought, Democrats define independent thought as you all have to be Democrats if you're black.
Right.
I mean, isn't that the very definition?
It's an insult, but that House Negro stuff, it's just racist.
Yeah.
It's just racist. And I would never let that guy on my network again. But in fact, MSNBC is playing to a very narrow demographic. They need their 2 million people a night. And their 2 million people are overwhelmingly hard left and or reliably Democratic voters. And they've just given up. Rachel Maddow runs that network now, and she wants that stuff.
And where's the New York Times and the Washington Post calling out that clip? Another example that was in my book is when Senator Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, African-American, responded to President Biden's national address. He was asked by Republicans to give the national rebuttal. A Democratic county chairman in Texas called him an Oreo. Did the New York Times cover it? No. Did the networks cover it? No. Now, I have examples in my book, properly so, the New York Times calling out obscure state legislators in Florida and Ohio who used inappropriate language in talking about blacks. And I was glad the New York Times called them out on it because no one should talk like that. But then they give a pass to the Democrat county chairman who calls Scott an Oreo. And you just showed another example. This is part of the problem when you have reporters who are all cut from the same Democrat cloth. They sweep the Democrat statements under the rug. They go after only the Republicans. And Hugh, here's the even bigger problem with all of this. When one side in American society says if we do it, we get the hammer dropped on us, but if the other does it, they get away with it, society splits even further. That one side doubles down. And they go, I'm going to do even more of that because the referee only blows whistles in my direction. It's not fair.
I go back to the last time I appeared on NBC, and I was with my friend Chuck Todd, but Chuck was simply wrong on a matter of constitutional law. I've been teaching it for 25 years. He said it's constitutional if the Senate passes it. You know that that's not true, and I know that it's not true. It's not true until it's adjudicated and decided, and impeaching a former president is not constitutional. We had a disagreement, but Chuck's not a lawyer. I am. You have a history quiz in suppression, deception, snobbery, and bias. And I think Chuck would do pretty good on that. I think most of these, the people that I've worked with over the years would do pretty good. But generally, the people who are talking heads on television and increasingly in print don't know things, Ari. I mean, basic things. They won't know that Zawahiri was in prison for trying to kill Sadat. They won't know that he teamed up with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan in the 80s. The looming tower, if it's been read by 10% of journalists covering the war on terror, would surprise me. Do you agree or disagree with me?
100% agree, and here's why. Look at the structure of any story in the New York Times, Washington Post right now, this morning. And what you'll see is first paragraph is kind of the event. And then second, third, fourth, fifth paragraphs are people arguing about the event. And if you're a reader, you want to know, tell me more about the event. Maybe I don't know enough. And you don't get that to the 14th or 15th paragraph if you get it at all. Reporting has been, and for decades, all about the clash and the fight. And it's as if the American people largely get left out of it. They don't get to hear what took place. And when they do, it's called analysis. And that's where opinion and bias always dominates, always to tell readers and viewers what they should conclude, as opposed to here are the facts, you conclude on your own.
Now, there are two epic scandals that you detail in Ari Fleischer's brand new book, Suppression, Deception, Snobbery, and Bias, which you've got to get if you want to get sort of a comprehensive compendium of all the errors. If you're Chris Lick, you read this 3 times before you do anything. You really do. Before you change CNN, you read this 3 times to understand the objective case for what has gone wrong. The 2 biggest scandals are the Steele dossier and the Hunter Biden laptop. And I'd like you to describe, you do it in detail, Ari, in your book, and you're fair. Let's start with the Steele dossier. What was it? Why did it corrupt American media? Have they renounced their corruption and denounced their participation in the fraud?
Yeah, the Steele dossier is the spark that lit the American media on fire against Donald Trump, totally unfairly. And reporters loved it and ran with it. Of course, it was opposition research paid by Hillary Clinton's campaign to make it look like Trump was a Russian dupe, and it allegedly was an intelligence document. And the problem was the press called it unverified and unsubstantiated, yet they published it anyway and ran massive numbers of stories about it, especially the New York Times. And my beef here is if you are an editor and somebody has information that is unsubstantiated and unverified, maybe you should say, we don't put it on the air until it's substantiated and verified. But, if the news was anti-Trump, it got a bump. And that was the problem. They were out to get Trump, and so they ran with something that was unsubstantiated, unverified, and did tremendous damage to national unity because of their tortured coverage of Trump.
It's pretty hard to overstate how much damage they did via the Steele dossier. I like to say that the amount of chatter that something generates within the Manhattan Beltway legacy immediacy is inversely proportional to the interest level in the American public. Nevertheless, it drives coverage, which drives politics. It drove Donald Trump nuts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he knew he was innocent of this stuff. It drove him crazy, the P tape, all that stuff. And I think it actually impacted his behavior in a way that adversely impacted the country because he was rightly outraged but wrongly expressing that outrage.
I asked
Your
Trump
assessment.
about that. I interviewed him for this book, and one of the questions I had for him was, did you think after you won in 16 you would start to get fair coverage? And he said he did. He expected that the press would change from their campaign tone, and he said, I thought it would be a beautiful thing. And then it wasn't. And that's, Hugh, what led him, in my opinion, to fight everybody all the time. He realized that he was up against such a biased, gigantic media system that would never give him a break and would be out to get him, that he went to unusual lengths to fight back. And I do think he would have been a much more toned-down president if the New York Times was fair, if the Washington Post was fair, if the networks were fair. All they had to do was tell the news straight, and we would have had a much less jagged Trump era because he wouldn't have been the only fighter out there.
Now, Ari, we've been on a trajectory. I was in the Reagan White House, and Marlin was Hugh in that time, and Fred Fielding was Don McGahn. And so I just got to see the legal side of it. But Reagan was treated poorly by the press. He was treated as ignorant, except by George Will. There's just what you heard that racist on MSNBC say about Herschel. They said every day about Ronald Reagan. And the attempt to stop the deployment of the Pershings and the cruise missiles in Europe was one of the most bald attacks on a president. Then H.W. comes along and they whisper scandal through his whole presidency. Then along comes W, and it's Bush lied, people died, and Katrina, and everything they could throw at him. And then along comes Mitt Romney, doesn't pay taxes. Harry Reid lies, says that it worked, doesn't it? And then along comes Trump. And every single time they ratchet it up. It is a pattern, and it culminates in the Hunter Biden story, which you cover. What is the worst sin about the Hunter Biden story? I have a theory, but what do you think is the worst consequence of suppressing it? That's the suppression.
Well, the motive, of course, and this is what the worst sin is they would never do anything to cover what could hurt Biden and reelect Trump. If they had covered that story from the beginning, exposing not Hunter's laptop, but the issue being Joe Biden lying about whether he knew of his son's business deals, as proven a liar because of the existence of the laptop, it would have helped Trump. And the press in the campaign of 2020 was going to do nothing if it could have helped Trump. And that's why news gets suppressed. And then, of course, big tech suppressed the New York Post stories that did report it and didn't allow you to tweet it, comment on it. They shut down the New York Post ability to use social media. It was the worst form of suppression. And it was, as I put in the book, sometimes reporters put their thumb on the scale. Other times they put their writing hand on the scale. And many times they put their entire bodies on the scale. On this one, their entire body was on the scale.
Did it change the outcome of the election?
Arguably so. It's a counterfactual now. Who knows? But that election was so damn close. 4 states, 40,000 votes would have flipped it. So anything could have changed this election.
Now, Ari, that brings me to polling. You're a professional. I always bring up the ABC Washington Post poll the week before the election in Wisconsin, which showed Joe Biden beating Donald Trump by 17 points. Yep. In fact, he won by 0.6. I believe that poll, more than any other story, lost the election for Donald Trump. And I've told Donald Trump that. That's why he lost. He lost day after I said he lost. I've never doubted it. I don't think there was fraud in any significant material factor in any election. And he disagrees with me about that and tells me I'm wrong whenever. But that poll changed the result in the election. Do you agree or disagree with me?
Yeah, I think a lot of factors did, but you can't rule that one out. And it wasn't just Wisconsin. It was in North Carolina. There were several states where the polling was wildly off, not only for Donald Trump, but for many Republican Senate candidates. And it's a pattern. And one of the things I showed in the book with data and specificity and all the numbers that prove it is when George W. Bush was president in 2006, the press ran poll after poll after poll after poll showing how unpopular Bush was. And that had a toll on Bush, and the Republicans lost the House and Senate in 2006. They lost the House and Senate in 2006. When Obama was similarly unpopular, they stopped running those polls. They didn't inform the American people that Obama had a 39% job approval rating. They ran something like 124 polls for Bush and like 8 for Obama.
Yep. So, News is where you look. polling is what you choose to poll. And Dan Rather said the former, and you and I are saying the latter. Right now, President Biden has historically low approval ratings, historically high inflation for this period in 40 years. This electorate has never seen this before, Ari. And he's getting a pass. I mean, they write about it grudgingly. Grudgingly, they write about it. And then, by they, I mean elite media, legacy media, New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, NBC, CBS. They just will not change. And so this is the bottom line. I want to come back to one more specific thing, PBS and NPR, and I'll let you go. And I really want people to go out, suppression, deception, snobbery, and bias. It's not going to change, is it? I mean, it just isn't. They're too invested. They're afraid to set off from the island or they'll have nobody watching them.
Well, my formula for change is, one, young conservatives should apply to journalism school. Two, journalism schools, when they interview people, should say, tell me what your hobbies are. And if you say hunting, fishing, let them in. You're going to automatically start to change what your newsroom looks like. And newsrooms have to want to have an independent, a booster shot of independent thought. They're killing themselves with all the like-mindedness. So that is what I call for. Will the people in charge do it? I doubt it, Hugh. But that's the only thing that'll save mainstream journalism. Otherwise, the future is great for conservatives. Conservative media will continue to boom, will continue to grow on the internet and on TV, and mainstream media will continue to fade.
Now, I've got to do my disclaimers before we talk about PBS and NPR. I worked for PBS for 10 years doing the nightly news in L.A. I did national series for them. I know and like Steve Inskeep. Yamiche and I have worked side by side for years. But Mara Lyson for years, Pat Morrison for years. It is a train wreck, Ari, and it's our money. But Yamiche is probably the most left-wing journalist working in America today, and she anchors Washington Week in Review. NPR is nothing but covering legacy media and sort of the Green New Deal stuff. Is that remotely constitutional in your view?
I have never, since I started working on Capitol Hill in the 80s, understood why they get a penny of taxpayer money. We don't do that in America. We have a private sector. We don't need taxpayer money to go to cover government news. So I've never liked it, and I don't know why Republicans haven't gotten rid of it when they were in charge.
All right. Now, years ago, when I was a kid, Washington Week in Review was my go-to show. It was the only thing. Then the McLaughlin Group came along, and those were the only. You know, if you're a political junkie, those are what you watched. Do you think Washington Week in Review has an audience? You can't find numbers anywhere. Do you think they have an audience?
Yeah. Well, that might be part of the problem, that with the proliferation of sources out there and us running toward niches, that a wonky show like that has a hard time sustaining itself. But it's got a real small audience.
And I think it's gotten extremely small because it's just a left-wing parade. Costa tried to stop it, but he couldn't, and now they've just given up and they've gone the MSNBC route. And that's where I think media is going, Ari. That's where I want to end. I think they are the canary in the coal mine. They have given up the pretense of objectivity. And I think you're going to increasingly see legacy media just be out and out left-wing because they don't know anything else.
Well, what's fascinating for the future, Hugh, is if you're a Republican running for president, if you're a Republican running for governor or senator, do you need the mainstream media at all? Have we gotten to the point in America where Republicans can flat out ignore all the press other than conservative press, build your own lists, send out your own media, do your own social media, and win? And the answer is increasingly yes. Look at how
that's what Chris Licht of CNN, he's out there on the Hill.
Thank goodness Ronald Romney, the chairman of the RNC, announced that we will no longer participate in the debates. Their deck is stacked. And why should we play along with the mainstream media when they are where they're activists instead of reporters? Times are changing, Hugh, and I don't know what role the mainstream media will have any longer, which is why I wrote this book.
You know, my advice to every candidate is to agree to do every single debate, as many as you can, but insist that the moderators be picked by the campaign in equal numbers. Not negotiated by the campaign, picked by the campaign. Because if you pick an idiot and you're a Republican, that'll blow up in your face. And if you pick an idiot and you're a Democrat, that'll blow up. But if you pick center left and center right, you'll get good debates and fair debates. And that debate commission should have been shuttered a decade ago.
When Hugh Hewitt asks questions of candidates, you ask deeper policy questions that make the audience see these guys think about the things that are relevant in life. You don't ask Hugh questions about you only got 42.3% of the vote. Didn't you need 44? Doesn't that show that you're lagging? You know, all these guys cover government and policy as if they were sportscasters, as opposed to people who ask probing, deep, thoughtful questions about the things
Former President Trump's still mad at me. We joke about it now, about my nuclear triad question in the 2016 debates, because it made him look bad. I mean, he still brings it up every time I talk to him. Ari, in terms of the best reporters in the White House when you ran the press room, who were they? Because I still have on Dan Balls, Michael Shear, Peter Baker. I put on pros, people that I think do their jobs. Who was the best in your tenure?
Yeah, David Sanger of the New York Times is a very deep, thoughtful, well-sourced reporter on national security. I've always thought Peter Baker was fair. Some of my Bush colleagues would disagree with that, but I've always thought he was fair. You know, Ron Fournier back then, there's a different Ron Fournier now, but Fournier back then was the chief AP correspondent, and he was a down-the-middle, tough but fair.
Turns out Ron is a liberal, but I didn't know it from his reporting when he was working.
That's right. Yeah, we've seen it now, but back then I called him fair. Steve Holland, one of the nicest, kindest, most gentlemanly people, the chief correspondent for Reuters. He's
still there.
At the White House.
I went abroad with him with Bolton. What a genuine gentleman.
Quality. Yep.
You know, if you let Steve moderate presidential debates, all three of them right now just declare Steve Holland's going to do all three debates, no matter who the candidates are, I think everyone would buy in.
Absolutely. I don't know that Steve could control the mob if the candidates start getting unruly, but he is fair as the day is long, and he is what good journalism should be.
Hey, Ari, I'm holding you. Two more questions. I've done 5 debates this year: Arizona governor and Senate, Ohio Senate, Minnesota governor, and the California recall. Hugh's rules: no question from a moderator can be longer than 30 seconds. No response can be longer than 75 seconds. Everybody gets a chance to respond to every question. And the bell rings, not the moderator. The bell goes bing at 75 seconds, and then they get 5 seconds to wrap up, then it goes bing, bing, bing. It never doesn't work. Why have we overcomplicated this? Is it in order to get ratings for the anchors?
Yeah, I just think reporters love to hear themselves speak. You know, the hardest questions, Hugh, are the shortest questions. When I stood at that podium, if a reporter asked me a one-sentence question, my wheels had to turn fast. But when they started to drone on and on and on,
you just gave it away, Ari.
In my mind.
You just gave it away. The longer the question, the more time to prepare the diversion.
Yep.
Well, I want to congratulate you again.
Short question. It's not about themselves. It's about the answer.
Well, it's always about the anchors. Oh, my gosh. Suppression, Deception, Snobbery, and Bias by Ari Fleischer. It's in bookstores everywhere. People need to go to Amazon and continue to make it sell. And don't believe the New York Times. I just think that's so funny, Ari, that they are themselves suppressing and deceiving about your book.
I'm proud to be number 8 and proud to be number 0.
Well done, Ari Fleischer. Always a pleasure. Follow him on Twitter at Ari Fleischer. Go get his book today. Thank you, Ari.
Thank you, Hugh. Great to be with you.
Great to be with you.